Okay, now this is part two. This will be the final part of this one. The makings of a virtuous woman. The makings of a virtuous woman. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands of who in here is a virtuous woman, because if you put your hand up, you'd say, well, that'd be pride by putting my hand up. And I don't want to do that because I'm virtuous. So I want to keep my hand up. Um, who in here knows somebody that is a virtuous woman? Okay. You know someone, you say, when I think of a virtuous woman, that's the person I think of. Does somebody's face pop into your mind right away? Is there someone in particular that you think of and you say, yes? In fact, there might be two or three people that pop into your mind. And the scripture says in the book of Proverbs, who can find a virtuous woman? So if you found one, you're blessed, right? For her price is far above what? Rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. I'm sure you ladies have already memorized Proverbs 31, so I don't have to go through it. It's already on your heart and you know it off by heart. So, but in in part one, we went over that being virtuous is not necessarily something you're born with. Now, you could be born with certain characteristics, certain personality traits, certain qualities. Some things you're born with, maybe you struggle with. And I'm talking about everybody here. There are things that we're born with that cause us grief. Amen. Certain personality traits, certain characteristics, certain temptations that we're prone to us. Think about this. Not everybody is tempted to drink alcohol, right? Not everybody is tempted to do drugs, but there are some that have weaknesses towards those. There are some that have weaknesses towards tobacco. Some may say, I don't worry about it. Didn't Pastor Jim mention many times that he had a problem with tobacco? In fact, he went door knocking, knocked on a door, and he had a rub of snuff, and the person came to the door, and he was witnessing to the person, and the person pointed out and said, well, what's in your mouth? And my dad got so convicted that he got on his face and cried to God that God would take that away from him, because he was so addicted to chewing tobacco. So people have different problems that they're born with. Now you could say, well, those are outside addictions. Well, are people born with an angry spirit? Do they have trouble with jealousy? Okay. Envy. You look in the Bible, how many had trouble with envy? I got a whole sermon on envy and how it's so prevalent in the Bible. And isn't envy basically the first sin? Wasn't it envy? Satan, Lucifer, envied God. He was proud and he envied God. So those are some things that are innate in us, and people struggle with those things. Now, virtue, do you think that's something women are born with? Let's say women are born with. I think all women have the ability to be virtuous. So I think that God has put that in the heart of a woman to want to be virtuous. But this is something that in your life you have to learn and you have to grow into, and you have to add this. Doesn't Peter tell us, add to your faith what? Virtue. Virtue. So it's something that you need to add. Now, last week I gave you a semi definition, just a short blip of what virtue really is. Hold on. In fact, I hope I wrote that down here because I had a good definition of virtue. Yeah, there it is. Virtue. Okay. And it was what I said last week was moral excellence. Moral excellence. Now, Christ had virtue. And of course, when the woman touched his garment, he said, I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. Now, moral goodness. But there was more to it than just moral goodness that went into that woman. What is virtue? Can a man have virtue? Christ did. So you think of virtue, though, associated with ladies. But when you think of virtue overall, it is moral goodness, okay? A particular moral excellence. So to be moral, pure, chaste, moral, disciplined in your behavior, but also strength. Strength is one of the definitions of virtue. Strength, bravery, valor. Now, when you think of strength, bravery, and valor, when you think of valor, what do you think of? You think of soldiers, okay? In fact, I think there was a movie that was out years ago that was called what? Uncommon Valor? Uncommon Valor, and it was about soldiers. I don't remember what the movie was about, but obviously it's about soldiers. Strength, bravery, valor. And here's what happened with Christ. When the woman touched his garment, I perceived that virtue has gone out of him. Okay, Christ was morally excellent. Christ had strength. Christ had bravery. Christ had valor. But this whatever it was that came out of him had action, and it had power. And that was another definition of the word virtue: acting power. Acting power. So if someone says that woman is virtuous, she has something called acting power, that in her actions, people see strength, and they get strength from her actions. They get bravery from her actions. They get a sense of morality from her actions. So add to your faith virtue. This is something that you want to put in play. Okay? Your faith in action should be virtuous. So again, when we talk about the makings of a virtuous woman, the makings of a virtuous woman are dependent upon choices. What you choose in your life. And that's why I always preach. Make sure, ladies, and I'm talking to everybody here, make sure you have your nose in your Bible. Make sure you're praying and you're a prayerful woman. Make sure that you're in church. And make sure that your family is obedient to you, to the rules of the house. Last night, I just happened to be flipping through the channels, and I came across Fox News just for a second to see what was on there, and it was Laura Trump. Now, I don't know much about her, but she was talking about motherhood, and she was talking about raising kids. And she was interviewing somebody, and then they broke to a little picture with a girl who was sitting on a stool, who was in the corner, looking in the corner like this. And she talked about this picture, and she talked about disciplining kids. And she said that in order for you to raise your child, you have to be, number one, consistent. They need to know that what you say is what you mean. And I thought that was really profound, and I was glad to hear that from her. And she showed a picture of her family with her two children, and she wasn't boasting about her family, but she said that there are rules in her house, and if the kids break those rules, they have to pay for breaking those rules. And she says, we don't give them the benefit of the doubt. We are really on top of them. And we make sure that we are consistent in our discipline, and that we are in agreement in our discipline. And really, when you think about that, that is a sense of virtue. And what this woman is doing is passing her values, whatever those values are that are important to her, she's making sure that she's instilling those in her children. And I know when it comes to discipline that men often, it's like, well, he needs the discipline. But that's not always the case, is it, ladies? Doesn't your child need to know that you mean business as well? And that, as my mother always used to say, you keep it up and I'm calling your dad at work. Well, Kelly and I, and she's here today, Kelly and I, we got wise to this. We had two phones in the house. Remember years ago when there were two landlines? And if you picked the other end up, you couldn't call on this end. So Kelly'd be like, I'm running to the room. Because she'd grab the phone, and then Kelly would get on the other end. She'd be like, you can't call, I'm on the phone. And then she'd leave it off the hook. So if my mother went back this way, then I'd pick the other phone up. And you say, oh, that was wrong. Well, after calls get through to your dad, you get a licking, so many times. After a while, you learn, that hurt, and we're going to try to come up with a plan. But my point to it all is, it shouldn't always be, well, you wait till your father gets home. Because the kids need to know that you, as a woman, as a mother, mean business. Okay? And I talked to my kids years ago, and I said to them, one day you're going to be a mother. You're going to have children. You can only scream so loud. Because what happens with women is they begin to raise their voice. And then the child says, well, mom's raising her voice. Then they get to the next level, to the next level, to the next level. You could only go so high with screaming. And after a while, the kids are used to the screaming mother. Don't let it get to that point. Make sure they know that first time, be consistent. And again, that's what I got from that little blip, just a 5-minute little conversation she was having with another woman on there about raising children. So you want to pass those characteristics, virtue, those traits, those good things off to your children. Okay, and again, it's all choices. And everybody starts out. You get that bundle of joy in your hands, and you start out with a child. And when they're 18 and 19 years old, you look back over their life and say, did we do a good job? Did we do it right? Did we do it right? Well, again, add to your faith virtue, not just with you, but add those characteristics to your children as well, and to your house. Make your house a virtuous house. Okay, now we talked about choices. All right, virtuous is mentioned 3 times in the Bible. We looked at this last week. It's mentioned with Ruth. Ruth chapter 3, verse 11. All people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. The other one is, who can find a virtuous woman? For price is far above rubies. A virtuous woman is a what? Here was the other verse. Is a crown to her husband. But she that maketh ashamed is as rottenness in his bones. Okay, so if you have a wife that is virtuous, it'll be like having a crown on your head. And if you don't have a wife that's virtuous, it's going to be like an arthritic condition. You're going to walk around with a cane and say, what happened to you? Well, you see this wedding ring? That's what happened to me. So be careful in your choices. Make sure that who you're with, who you're marrying, there's signs of virtue there. And before we go to Ruth and we talk about these choices, virtue comes from Christ. So let's look at 2 passages about Christ. Let's go to, I quoted 1 Peter. We don't need to go there. I quoted the virtuous 3 times. We talked about that last week, but we didn't go to these passages on Christ. In fact, we didn't go to both of them. We went to one. Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. Luke 6. Luke chapter 6, verse 17. And he came down with them and stood in the plain in the company of his disciples, and a great multitude of people out of all Judea and Jerusalem, and from the sea coast of Tyre and Sidon, which came to hear him, to be healed of their diseases. And they that were vexed with unclean spirits, and they were healed. Now here, wasn't it one woman who sought to touch him to get virtue out of him? But look what happens here. And the whole multitude sought to touch him, for there went virtue out of him and healed them all. So here we got another case where virtue goes out of him, where people are just touching. Imagine how incredibly powerful he was, that all they had to do was just touch his garment, and virtue would go out and heal them all that touched his garment. So virtue comes from the heart of Christ. And if you want virtue, it's like wisdom. Pray for it and ask God for it and keep adding it to your life. Let's go to Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8 and verse 46. And again, the title of this message is The Makings of a Virtuous Woman. And I believe the makings of a virtuous woman deal with the choices we make in life. Luke 8 verse 46. And Jesus said, somebody hath touched me. I like in verse 45. Jesus said, who touched me? Weren't they all touching him? They were. Everybody tried to touch his garment. Imagine being him and just how he was hounded by people. And yet, in all of that hounding, he never got bitter. He did get weary. And one passage, they said, he is beside himself. I get kind of a chuckle out of that, because it's like even the Lord got beside himself when he got surrounded by people. He just got overwhelmed. He didn't sin, but he got overwhelmed with just the situation. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied, Peter and they that were with him said, Master, the multitude throng thee and press thee, and sayest thou, who touched me? And Jesus said, somebody hath touched me, for I perceive that virtue is gone out of me. And when the woman saw that she was not hid, she came trembling and falling down before him. She declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. That's power, huh? And he said unto her, daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace. He could have scolded her, couldn't he have? He could have said, well, what were you thinking? Why did you touch me? But he didn't. And when she was ashamed and very, embarrassed about it, he said, go in peace. Thy faith hath made thee whole. That's the power of God. That's amazing power. And that's the Savior we serve. Really. Jesus Christ, the same what? Yesterday, today, and forever. So can he do the same thing today? He absolutely can. Do you say, well, his garment isn't there to touch? On the contrary, doesn't God wear, what is his garment? The heavens. So there it is. We live in the heaven. Now, one day he's going to fold it. You say, well, that's a second heaven, but that's his garment. Okay? Virtue. Virtue proceeds from Christ. The makings of a virtuous woman. So if you want to be virtuous, who do you need to draw close to? Christ. You need to draw close to the heart of Christ. Okay? That's the start of becoming virtuous. Making the right decisions. And I'm going to go to a man who told him, I made my decision. Now you choose. Who was that man? Joshua. Joshua chapter 24. Joshua 24. Making the right decisions. Who in here has ever made a wrong one? Nah, come on. Made a wrong decision. And you say, that's a decision I have regretted all my life. Okay, well, you can't do anything. It's water over the dam, as they say. You can't cry over spilled milk. But you can learn from your bad decisions. And how many people don't? The man in Proverbs 23. In fact, let's go there. Sunday school, we can flip around here a little bit. Keith, stay here, and I want you to go to Proverbs 23. Now, here's a man here who kept making the wrong decision. And it's in regard to alcohol. And I guess you could probably put drugs in here too, because these are addicting things. I guess pornography could be another one. Isn't it addicting? Has an addiction to it? Pornography, drugs, addiction to alcohol, addiction to tobacco, addiction to, here's another one. Can you be addicted to lying? Liars. Lying starts with one lie, and it builds. That's why, when you got a child that tells a lie, and I learned by the seat of my pants on this one. I told my dad a lie, and it was the worst beating I ever got in my life. In fact, he told me, he said, going to go downstairs. And he said, what I want you to do is put on your thickest pair of jeans. And I said, oh. I wanted to get a pad and put them underneath of that too. But and I said, wow, he must be serious. He whipped me so bad. He said, I won't have a lying son. I will not have a lying child. And he whipped me until tears were coming out of his eyes. And we say, well, that's child abuse. That's child abuse. I tell you what, I didn't lie after that. It's something I remembered the rest of my life. And, I caught myself the other day in something. Somebody asked me a question and I said something to them. And then I ended up not doing what I told them I was going to do because I had a change of plans. But I stopped for just a second and I thought to myself, did I kind of tell them a lie? And it reminded me, and it all came back, and I was like, Lord, if I even thought that or did that, I am sorry. Because doesn't the Bible say provide things honest in the sight of God? Honesty. Never lie. Don't lie. Is that hard? Is it always easy to tell the truth? Oh, it can be so hard. You say people just make a life of lying. Have you ever known a liar? And I don't want to get into the people that I've known in my life, but there was one person, you'd talk to her and you'd say, I want to believe you. I want to so badly believe you, but I don't because you are a liar. Addictions. Okay, here's one in Proverbs 23. Bad choices. It says in verse number 29. So you want to be a virtuous woman? Stay away from alcohol. Now you say, well, men are drunks. Anybody know any women that are? But women don't show it like men. Women will do it in their house or somewhere where it's secret. Men are blatantly open about things. Can women be alcoholics? Can women be drug addicts? Can women be addicted to things? Sure they can. All right. Here's a man here. Who hath woe? Who hath sorrow? Who hath contentions? Who hath babbling? Who hath wounds without cause? Who hath redness of eyes? You say those are bad things. He asked how many questions there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions. And then he says in verse 30, they that tarry long at the wine, they that go to seek mixed wine, look not thou upon the wine when it is red, when it giveth his color in the cup, when it moveth itself aright. At the last it biteth like a serpent, and stingeth like an adder. Thine eyes shall behold strange women, and thine heart shall utter perverse things. You ever hear a man talk when he's drunk? And the things they talk about? Verse 34. Yea, thou shalt be as he that lieth down in the midst of the sea, or as he that lieth upon the top of a mast. You're going to be seasick. How about it, Renee? Seasick. Renee knows the feeling of being seasick. Anybody here ever been seasick? We went out on a fishing tour one evening, and the swells were about 8-foot swells. We were on a 90-foot boat, and I'll tell you what, I don't care how big that boat was. Those waves were having its way with that boat. And we were up and we were down, and we were up and we were down. And Nadine gave in first. And then Renee gave in second. I look over and I see my wife leaning on the back of a big black man's shoulder. And she's over there like this, just finding comfort on that big black man's shoulder. And I'm like, she's like, and I said, you're sick. In every way, there was vomit moving back and forth. People all over the place, just vomiting. I'm like, a guy come up to me and he said, he and I just, one of the crewmen there, one of the mates, he come up and he said, you're hanging in there. You're hanging in there. I said, I'm hanging in there. And here they had a thing about catching the biggest fish. If you gave $5 and whoever caught the biggest fish, you got to take the pot. And he said to me at the beginning, he said, just give me $5. I said, no, that's kind of this. I said, I'm just going for fun. I ended up catching the biggest fish. Go figure. If I had given the 5, I would have caught one that big. So he's watching me, and Brittany's watching me too, because she's the trooper. She's like, I'm not getting sick, Dad. I'm not getting sick. Well, the boat rocked and the boat rolled. And there I was baiting my hook, and the boat rolled, and I went all the way down to the water, and I almost could touch the water. And then I went way back up like this, and I came back out this way, and and I look over at him and he's laughing. I look over to her and she's like, I know the feeling of what it's like to be down in the midst of the sea that lieth upon the top of a mast. That feeling stuck with us the rest of the night. We got home and said, wow, Who in here's ever been seasick? Oh, what a feeling. Okay. What did the alcohol do to this guy? It made him feel like that. Now, here's the thing. If sin can make you feel that way, why would you want to go do it again? So, in life, if sin has made us feel this way, and you say, what's the makings of a virtuous woman? Okay. Has sin ever made you feel that way? Well, a virtuous woman would learn from that, wouldn't it? And a virtuous woman would say, I learned. I'm not doing that ever again. And that's where growing through your preteen and teenage years, you do things, but you learn from them. And I believe that the greatest verse on that is when David says, Lord, remember not the sins of my youth. The sins of our youth, God has a tendency to forgive us of those sins and look over those sins a little bit more than he does when we get older. Because we're growing into ourselves, aren't we? We're trying to find ourselves. We're trying to find what kind of person we are. We're trying to find what life to live. We're trying to find a mate. We're trying to find a career. We're trying to find it. And in that, you make mistakes. And in that, sometimes you sin. Sometimes you get around the wrong people. But thank God he has mercy. If you keep doing that through the rest of your life, now you have chosen not to be virtuous. Because now you've chosen the wrong way, knowing it's the wrong way. This man here chose the wrong way, but he could have walked away from it. But then we get to the last verse, and this verse is very important. It says, after he's seasick, after he's got the hangover here, verse 35, they have stricken me, shalt thou say, and I was not sick. They have beaten me, and I felt it not. When shall I awake? These words right here. What's he going to do? I will seek it yet again. I'm going to go back and do it again. Isn't that foolish? But some people just don't learn. Now, in this all, we can honestly say we've all sinned. And we've all chosen the wrong thing. Ruth, obviously, in her life, we're talking about Ruth as far as virtue. Ruth obviously made some bad choices. But she saw in her mother-in-law a life for God. And her sister, Orpah, went back and chose the things that she had left. She went back to them. And that's what Naomi says. Go back to your people. Go back to your way of living. Go back to your gods. Ruth didn't want to go back. And that's what made Ruth virtuous. She made the right choice. We're in Joshua. Let's go to Joshua 24. So what choices are you making? Joshua 24. And 15. Let's go to 14 and 15. Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in truth. Joshua 24:14. And put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose ye this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That is the start of being virtuous. I'm going to choose no matter what. As for me, I'm making the decision for me. As for me, then being that he was a father and a husband, and my house, we will serve the Lord. So ladies, today I ask, ladies, how about you? You're going to choose to serve the Lord. You say, well, my husband's already made that choice. Yeah, but sometimes the husband can make a choice and the wife not be completely on board. When you serve the Lord, and serves the Lord, or you, if you're single, you serve the Lord and be faithful to God. And you say, when I meet somebody, I want to make sure that they are on board with me. How many young people marry wrong? They're faithful to come to church, and then they meet somebody, and the next thing you know, they get married, and they're no longer a part of the church. What happened? They made the wrong choice. You say, well, they married a nice girl. They married a nice boy. They married. What's first? As for me and my house, we will what? Serve the Lord. Ruth had this in mind. Let's go to Ruth. Her choices. Ruth chapter 1. Ruth chose godly things. Let's go to Ruth. Ruth chapter 1. You know you're getting old when you got to go Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel. And if I start doing this, Tommy, Kelly, huh? Yeah. Wait. Yeah. It's always like, did you get a new Bible? No, I'm just blowing my pages apart to find out where I need to go. Okay, Ruth chapter 1, and let's look in verse. Ruth chose the godly choices. It says in verse number, let's go verse 11. Ruth chapter 1, verse 11. And Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes, that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me. And they lifted up their voice and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. So two women, they're going to make choices. Orpah, after this, is never heard from again in the Bible. Did anybody watch The House of David? Any of that? They actually have Orpah as the mother of Goliath. Yeah, it's an interesting take on it, that she gets envious against what Ruth becomes. And Ruth is the, help me, Renee, great-grandmother? Great-grandmother of David. And when she hears this, she gets envious of David's position, and Goliath is of her seed. Now, that's Hollywood. Is there any truth to that? I don't believe it, but that's what they say. So you got Orpah never being heard from again, and you got Ruth, who goes with Naomi and makes the choice to go with Naomi because she knows that's where God is. She chooses this way, and God blesses her. It says, Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. Didn't Naomi do her best to try to persuade them to leave? But what does Ruth say? And Ruth said, and I often joke about this, keep it up. Not one more word. Zip it. I'm going with you. I don't want to hear one more word. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest, will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. Now, of course, they come into Bethlehem. Ruth chooses the godly things. And then we go to Ruth chapter 2. Ruth makes another choice. Ruth chooses to glean in a field of Boaz. This was Ruth's choice. Okay? Ruth chapter 2, verse 1. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man of wealth of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Now, this is Ruth's choice. Again, becoming virtuous and godly is about making the right choices. So Ruth had some insight. And that's the other. Spiritual perception is very important when it comes to virtue. And ladies, the more you read your Bible, the more God will give you spiritual perception. And the wiser you'll become. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said unto the reapers, The Lord be with you. And they answered him, The Lord bless thee. Then said Boaz unto his servants that was set over the reapers, Whose damsel was this? Now, didn't her choice of going to that field prompt him to ask that question? Whose damsel is this? So there was some interest. And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, It is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. And she said, I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. Then said Boaz unto Ruth, Hearest thou not, my daughter? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. Let thine eyes be on the field, that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men, that they shall not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face and bowed herself to the ground, and said unto him, Why have I found grace in thine eyes, that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing I am a stranger? And Boaz answered and said unto her, It hath been fully showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother and the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. The Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. This is virtue in development. This is Ruth adding to her faith virtue, and we see it happening. And as you read through Ruth, you see the choices that she makes. Didn't she choose to go to his field? And then what happens? God blesses her, and he says, don't go to anybody else's field. Glean here. My servants won't bother you. When you're thirsty, go over there and get a drink, and I will take care of you. Now, this is setting itself up for something else, isn't it? Ruth made right choices. Being virtuous means making the right choices. Praying about those things. Okay, Ruth chapter 3. Ruth chapter 3. Naomi now gets involved. Verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? And now is not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself, therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor. But make not thyself known unto the man until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do. She said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me, I will do. Taking counsel of her mother-in-law, trusting a godly woman and her advice. Watch what happens. And she went down unto the floor, and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. She came softly, and uncovered his feet, and lay her down. And it came to pass at midnight that the man was afraid, and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, Who art thou? She answered, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman. And he said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as thou followest not young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, fear not. I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art what? A virtuous woman. She didn't come into the city with everybody thinking she was virtuous, but by the time this happens, all the city knows that woman's a woman of great character. She's a virtuous woman. And now it is true that I am thy near kinsman, howbeit there's a kinsman nearer than I. Tarry this night, and it shall be morning, that if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then will I do the part of a kinsman to thee, as the Lord liveth, lie down until the morning. What is the whole kinsman thing? Who doesn't understand what the kinsman redeemer is? Who does? Who understands? Okay? In a nutshell, Ruth is single. She's part of Naomi's family. She's part of Elimelech's family, being that she's with Naomi, and she had married Naomi's son. Okay? So she gets in here. Boaz is the closest relative outside of another man to Naomi. And he says to Ruth, he said, I can do the kinsman, but there's one closer than me. I will go to him and see if he wants to do it. Okay? So if he won't do it, Boaz will, which means when Boaz does the part of the kinsman, he buys all that pertains to Naomi, and that would include who? That includes Ruth. So he says, I'll do it. So she took Naomi's advice. She gets blessed for this. All right, watch. Let's go to Ruth chapter 4. It says in verse 1, Then went Boaz up to the gate and sat him down there, and behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit ye down here. And they sat down. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people. If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know there is none to redeem it beside thee. And I am after thee. And he said, I will redeem it. So the man was willing to buy the land, wasn't he? But what was the caveat? When you buy the land, you get the girl. Then said Boaz, What day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar mine own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now this was the manner in the former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing. For to confirm all things, a man plucked off his shoe, this is interesting, and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, Buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, Ye are witnesses this day that I bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren and from the gates of his place. You are witnesses this day. And all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel, and do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And when he went in unto her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. Who was that son? It says in verse 16, And Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom, and became nurse unto it. And the woman, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, There is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. And to make it all even better, Ruth by making the right choices and becoming a virtuous woman. Her sister Orpah goes this way, her sister-in-law Orpah that way, Ruth this way. By the time it's all done, God takes this Moabitish woman, who basically shouldn't have been in this position. God blesses her and her obedience and creates in her virtue. She has a baby to Boaz. And God says, David's coming from that line. And who else? Jesus Christ is coming from the line of Ruth. Wow. All because a woman, now we're a virtuous woman. The makings of a virtuous woman. There it is. Ruth chapter, the whole book of Ruth, about the makings of a virtuous woman. Today, strive, add to your faith virtue. Strive to be virtuous, ladies. Virtuous. A great, great characteristic, straight from the heart of Christ. Okay, we'll take a break.